Are we ready? Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm so happy to see so many faces and new people and people that have been around before. And I know it's great to see you. Welcome to the Bernina Upper Level Sewing Mastery class. It says I'm Marcia Cowan down in the corner, but believe me, I am not Marcia Cowan. This is Ann Porter, and I'm the one that is going to be leading you through your discovery and working on your machine. So I hope that what you have set up for you this morning is your machine ready to be sewing. It can be turned on at this point if you haven't turned it on. I hope you have your workbook, the printout of the workbook. We're going to be using that all during the class. It's not something that we're going to be doing page by page, but we will be using it. And ready to learn about your machine and all the features of your new Bernina. So without further ado, I'm going to move over to the machine and want to kind of start with the workbook so that you're kind of looking at your workbook and having it ready for you to use. And hopefully you got it printed out and kind of at least in a pile beside you, because one of the things we're going to be, do what with it?
Just turn it on.
Ah,
There you go.
there. Ah, more light. Good. Okay. One of the things that we'll be doing with it is we're going to be skipping around a lot, because what we plan to do with the mastery class today is to use as many of the features as we possibly can of your machine and get you so that you're just really comfortable moving around in the machine. We're not going to do a page by page sample. And so most of what I'm going to be focusing on are going to be things that you would use in doing quilting kinds of projects, embroidery kind of projects, using decorative stitches, not your embroidery feature. And then the unique features that the machine has to offer. And so we're going to start on page 5 of your workbook. And this is going to be, today we're just going to concentrate on basics and kind of the basic features of the machine, how to set up the machine for the sewing that you're going to be doing, and just how to do the maintenance on your machine a little bit. So if you would find page 5 in your workbook, all of the things that are listed on here are things that we're going to be working on. And so our very first thing that we're going to do is look at cleaning and oiling your machine. We'll look at presser feet. We'll look at your feed dogs. We'll look at needles and thread and how to thread both your bobbin and your needle so that you're ready to sew. So I'm going to put my page back in front of me so I can see what's going on, and we'll get started. The first thing I want to talk about is keeping your machine clean and ready for sewing. And the first thing is keeping it clean. And the place that you need to keep it clean is going to be under the stitch plate of the machine. And on the back of your stitch plate, there is a little circle. And this, I'm going to see if I can kind of point to things. This little circle is the place for your thumb press to push the stitch plate loose from your machine so that it pops up so that you can remove the stitch plate. And I was really excited when we pulled this machine off of the floor because it is full of lint, as you can see. And so these are my 2 favorite cleaning tools for cleaning underneath the stitch plate, either the little cleaning brush that you have or a Q-tip. Either one of them work really well. And what you want to do is be sure that you're lifting this lint that you're lifting this lint out of the machine. This one's ready. And brushing all the way around the feed and really get all this stuff out of here. And when I kind of get the big stuff out, then I change to a Q-tip because it'll get the little stuff out. And you know you've got a nice clean machine to get started. If your machine's new, it should come clean, but when they've been sewing for a while, the lint will build up and need to clean. My kind of thing is anytime I change my stitch plate, anytime I change a project, then it's time to check to be sure that it's ready to clean. And when it's time to put your stitch plate back on the machine, there are 2 little holes on the left side, and your thumbprint goes in the upper right-hand side. So when you put it back on, slip it under, set those 2 holes on the pin to the side.
Question, Anne. Question, Anne, I'm sorry to interrupt. Before you put the plate back on, how do you clean under the cutter? The cutter.
You need to clean under the cutter, okay? You're going to have to go into the setups of the machine, and I'll do that with you as we work on it, okay?
Okay.
If you'll keep that in mind, that's something that we will do when we're in the setup features of your machine, because that's where that happens.
Okay.
Under your presser foot, it's just getting the lint out. Plus, you'll find if you've gotten any little threads caught underneath the thread cutter, that even with your little brush, you can sometimes get those little bits of thread under the thread cutter. So you do always want to be sure that you're cleaning here under the thread cutter on the left side. It'd be just right in here. Okay, to put it back on, again, just set it on the 2 pins and push straight down. The other place that you're going to want to clean and oil is in the bobbin case. And again, I'm going to do that a little bit later. The bobbin case we're going to be opening in a little bit, and we'll talk about that. I just wanted to get all the lint out from under the stitch plate so that I know this machine is going to run very well, and for you to do that as well. Any other questions? I want to also remind you about cleaning and oiling underneath your bobbin case that Izzy has a little video on our web page that takes you right through all of the cleaning and oiling features of the machine. And so if I haven't answered questions for you, if you want to review, his video is excellent to show you how to do that extra cleaning, but we will do that. I'm just going to get us kind of cleaned under the presser foot because that's the thing that you need to do most often.
That's on besocreative.com.
I'm sorry, Madeline, again?
besocreative.com.
Yes, besocreative.newmexico.com. .newmexico.com.
Thank you.
And it's cleaning, and it's I think it's actually Izzy's cleaning. We'll look it up and have that for you. Yeah, there on the screen is the website. Okay.
It's a dash.
Okay. The next thing, did you find it? Okay. The next thing I want to talk to you about, or the next thing on our getting ready to stitch, anytime you're getting set up for a project, one of the things that you wanted to do is decide what stitch plate is going to be most appropriate for the project that you're working on. And the two stitch plates that I like the best and that I keep to use all the time are either the 9mm stitch plate, which comes on all of your machines and has the wide opening for the needle path in order to make the wide decorative stitches on your machine. And for decorative stitches, this is all I use. When I'm doing piecing or quilting or free motion stitching, then the stitch plate that I want to use is the 0 stitch plate. And anytime you select a different stitch plate to go onto your machine, you want to be sure that you set the security for the machine as well. So I'm going to go up to here. So on the face of your machine, on the left side are the next three things we're going to talk about. The stitch plate is shown, the presser foot is shown, the needles are shown, and underneath here, the feed dogs are shown. So when you're talking about what presser foot should I use today, you want to select the presser foot and you want to tell the machine which presser foot you have on it. You can see right now that this one is set with the 9mm presser foot. It says it here. The green check mark has confirmed it's on there. My machine knows I'm going to do decorative stitches, and so I won't break needles. But when it's time for me to do piecing for quilting, then I want to look at and choose my 0 presser foot so that when I change the presser foot, my machine knows I put the 0 presser foot on it, and my needle's going to break if I try and do a decorative stitch. It's just a security feature that is really a protection for both, not only your needles, but also for the machine, for damaging your machine. There are 3 other presser feet that you can purchase as optional feet for your machine. There's a 5.5mm, and when I'm using a walking foot, walking feet only allow a 5.5 width stitch. And I'm seriously thinking about this 5.5 because I really like to do straight line quilting with my walking foot. So that's kind of in my wish list. The other 2, I have the punch for needle felting. And then I also have, on those of you that have the 790 machine and the 880 machine, you may have this presser foot instead of this presser foot. It may have a yellow dot on it instead of a red dot on it. If it has the yellow dot, you can use it for 0 straight stitching, and you can also use it with your cut work feature of the machine. So for today, I'm going to go back to my 9mm, and that's the security that I'm going to set. But as sure as I change to piecing, I'm going to pull out my 0. If you have the embroidery unit with your machine, you should have this presser foot in your collection as well. While I've got this up here, I want to point out some other things on this foot that are all there to help you. And one of them are the vertical markings on it. It's marked in inches for those of us that are US people. And but it's also divided in millimeters. It has these 2 horizontal lines on your presser foot are really placement lines for your fabric. And if you will, as you put your fabric underneath your needle, if you bring that fabric back to that back horizontal line, your first stitch is going to happen in fabric, not off in the air behind your fabric. If it goes to the front, you can see the needle hole, and your needle will not go into the fabric. It'll go into the air behind your fabric, and then you have to grab hold and take the next stitch. So presser feet really have a job. They also have vertical lines that you can use if you're quilting something on the diagonal and you need to follow a diagonal stitch. I don't do that very often, but it's possible to do it. The millimeter numbers are across the top of your presser foot, the inches across the bottom of all your presser feet, and they're all the same. Questions about presser feet? Security is important and just for needle and machine protection.
And I have a question.
Yes.
Can you hear me? When you change to the proper plate, does the machine refuse to sew if, for example, you have the single hole plate on, but you're in zigzag stitch? Will it refuse to sew?
Yes.
It won't refuse to sew, but it will show you a line. If you have chosen a decorative stitch and you still have the 0 presser foot on it, when the picture, and I can't really do that real quickly, but let me kind of, when I have a decorative stitch, and I'm cheating on this and a little, I'm going to tell it I have a 0 presser foot on there. And then I'm going to select a decorative stitch.
And then with your foot on it, it'll also only show a straight stitch because
Okay. Okay. Here's the straight stitch that you would be sewing with a 0 presser foot. And the presser foot that you're seeing on the screen is like a 1/4 inch presser foot, or it's your number 1 presser foot. But if my machine thinks I have a 0 presser foot on there, and I go to a decorative stitch, and I select a decorative stitch.
It keeps it there. It won't show
Okay. This is what the machine says. The only way you can sew that decorative stitch is in a straight line because you have a 0 presser foot on, or 0 stitch plate on it. Your machine will sew it, but it'll look like a straight line.
What if you change the foot to a 1C?
Okay, let me, the other thing I'm going to change is,
Or 1D.
and let me, I'm going to go to a number 1. Get in the right place. I want presser foot number 1D. Here's 1, here's 1C, here's 1D. They're both 1C and 1D are recommended for a decorative stitch. If I test and say I have 1D on here and I look at my screen,
It'll still show you the straight.
it will still show you that that decorative stitch is just a single line because it's protecting your needle. That answer your question, Mary?
Yes, it does. So
Yeah.
as long as you tell the machine, I'm just sort of going back over it, which plate you have on, the machine will not do a stitch that
Yes.
won't go through that single hole. It'll just keep telling you it's
For
going to go
instance, let me
through.
just show you. I have that decorative stitch selected. I
Uh-huh.
have a 1D foot that is a 9 millimeter. I can come back over to my stitch plate security. If I select my 9 millimeter, which is what I have on my machine, and close this, now can you see I have a decorative stitch?
Yeah.
And it's saying,
Okay, that does
yes, now
answer
you
my
can sew
question.
that because you have the
Thank you.
correct presser foot
Yeah.
and you have the correct stitch plate for the type of sewing that you're
It's
doing.
protecting your needle, but it's not protecting the foot you have on. In other words, if it's the wrong foot, it can still hit.
Yeah, you can still hit it. Yeah.
Exactly. Because it's the foot that you're going to hit if you know, with your needle, or or the bed of the machine underneath that you would hit. Yes.
Right.
And so the whole purpose of the security is to give you both the security for the correct presser foot, as well as the correct stitch plate, as well as the correct stitch that you've selected to sew.
Okay, that makes total sense. Thank you.
Yes. Want to talk, and while we're talking about, let me just give you, in your manual, we're looking at the little blurb on it that's talking about the stitch plate, and it's saying attach the appropriate stitch plate, meaning that it's going to be the appropriate stitch plate for what you're going to be doing with the machine, the kind of sewing that you're going to be doing, the kind of project that you're going to be doing. If you turn over to page 11 in your workbook, and let me just pull this out a second. If you turn over to page 11 will review for you exactly what we've been talking about on setting the security for, this is setting the security for the needle, which we'll talk about in a minute, but the bottom part of it is selecting the security for the stitch plate. And it's just showing you again the stitch plates that you have and how to touch the correct stitch plate for the stitch plate that's on your machine. So those 2 pages. The other thing I'm going to include in your kit, which will be ready for you to pick up later this week, is I'm going to give you the little page list for the features that we're talking about today, because they're really kind of spread all through your book. And I want you to be able to go back to the book when you have a question, and also to kind of know where we're going and where we've been with the different features of the machine. So from page 11, I'm going to go back to page 5. And now we're going to talk about presser feet for just a minute. And our number 1 presser foot, one of the reasons that Bernina has so many presser feet is because one of the things that they really do is design presser feet. All machines do, but Bernina does a wonderful job of designing presser feet for specific projects to make them easier, to make them more successful, just to be helpers. And the book of feet talks about all of them and how to use them, what kind of projects you can do with them. Why they were designed, what they're for. It's just kind of my reference book for presser feet. And let me pull out some presser feet I want to show you. What have I got there? Presser feet have kind of evolved over the life of machines, as machines have gotten more and more creative and more giving you more and more choices of things to do. So if you're looking at these 3 feet that I have on the machine, these are all the standard reverse stitch presser foot that machines have had on it forever and ever and ever. But they're all a number 1 foot, and they look just a little bit different. Number 1 feet that just have the number on them and just have a single shaft to attach to your machine are the classic presser feet for the machine. They were designed for stitch stitch plates that were 5.5 millimeters, the largest stitch that we had up until we got to about the 200s and the 730s, for those of you that have been using Berninas for years. When Bernina moved to a 9 millimeter stitch plate, one of the things that had to happen was that the feed had to be moved wider on the machine so that it could accommodate this wider stitch opening. And so as those feed dog moved wider, the soles of presser feed had to get wider as well so that they would cover the feed and move your fabric underneath your machine. And so the second generation of presser feet, of calling them anything, are the C feet. And C means a coated foot. And so you see the little window, is it a camera?
Yeah, it's like a lens.
It's a lens that lets your machine computer talk to the presser foot and talk to the machine. And so a wider foot is there, and the little lens that's going to read what your machine is now saying, as machines have become computerized.
Yeah.
So this is the second generation.
All it
And
tells it to do is that it lets it open up more on the machine.
Marco is here helping me, and he's got the real skinny on what all of this does. But what the lens does is it tells the machine to open up for those wider stitches. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
so that it will
if you use
accommodate.
The regular one and it doesn't have the lens, it will know that it could only do the 5.
Yeah, and the machine knows that if you've got this foot on there, it just does 5. But it knows if you've got a C foot with the reader on it, that it's going to open up for your wide decorative stitches. And then a couple of years ago, Bernina moved into the third generation stitches. And these are the number D foot, and they look really different. If you will compare, my hand's not in the way, if you'll compare, even the size of the sole is just a teeny bit, seems just a teeny bit wider. It may not be actually, but I guess they're about the same width. It's the wider width to accommodate the feed of the wider stitch. But they're open in the back to have a place for your dual feed feature to come down and connect into the back of the foot. And then the purpose of this foot is to move your fabric under the feed a stitch at a time so that it stays together. I just did a training with Bernina, and one of the things that they really pointed out with the D foot is that anytime you're sewing 2 pieces of fabric, a D foot, meaning dual feed, is really going to be working well on that particular combination of fabric. So I'm going to take my 1C foot off of my machine. And I'm going to put the 1D foot on. And I don't, if I bring the dual feed lever down from the back, and you see that little finger moving down, and it's on the back of your machine, it simply moves into that groove behind your presser foot and snugs right in there. Doesn't have to lock or anything else. It just fits in there. And then it will be pulling your fabric underneath the presser foot. The dual feed should always be used when you're using a D foot. It's designed for it. To release it, you're just going to push down on the D feature, lift it to the back, and I'm going to take this off again for a minute. And the reason you want that dual feed attached with this is because this whole foot now has an open space in the back that your 1C doesn't. And so it needs that dual feed feature moving your fabric underneath so that you've got full pull on your fabric as you take the stitch. If you try and sew with your D, you may get some surprises about the way the stitches form a little bit. And so 1D, always attach the dual feed feature. If you're using a 1C foot, do not try and attach your dual feed. Your machine will not sew. It will absolutely lock up and say, sorry, I don't know what you're doing or why you're doing that, but I can't sew with that dual feed attached to a C foot. Questions? Okay.
And can you show how that you bring that dual feed arm down again to go into the foot?
Yes. Yes.
Here, I can go around.
Yes. Marco will help us come around on the back so that you can see that when we do that. Okay. Okay. We'll move the camera just a minute because
Yeah.
this is a feature on every one of your machines, you know, from the 480 up to the 880. Okay. This is, get me back here. This is, okay, I can't see what they're seeing, but this is your dual feed feature. Okay, you just lay your finger on the top of it and pull it downward until it catches into the back. They're not being able to see that on the screen.
You can't, but they can.
They can, okay, okay, good.
So
When you're ready to remove it, you simply push down slightly and pull it to the back till it comes up. Don't turn it loose. And it's not a fly off. You really just, you want to be in control of it. Bring it down softly and move it back up out of the way.
The foot
Okay,
has to,
questions? One more time.
the
Okay.
foot,
Just move it down until it just fits into the back there. Push it down and bring it up to the back.
the foot has to be in the upper position for you to do that. If you put it,
Yes, good point. Yes, the foot has to be in the raised position in order for it to attach. The foot needs to be in the upper position as you're setting up your machine, both for if you're doing threading the needles or if you're changing presser feet. I'm going to take this one off for now and put my 1C back on for what we're doing. When you change presser feet, you need to also go back to your security, and you're going to want to change. This is probably one of the most important things you do in changing your presser feet. And there are several pages in your workbook that talk about presser feet, and I'll kind of go over them with you in just a minute, but let me show you on the screen. Can you see that my machine right now says that I have a 1D foot on it, and it's in yellow? That means that I have changed a presser foot from earlier and have a new presser foot on there, but I don't. I really went back and I put my 1C foot on it. If you're sewing on the 880 or the 790, and the 770 also, I believe, when you are selecting presser feet, you have on your screen all of the presser feet that they can think of for this machine. And you have little arrows on the bottom that will move you through the collection of presser feet that go with this machine. Move you all the way to the very last couple of presser feet, and then you can arrow back so that you can hunt through this whole screen until you find the presser foot that you're actually wanting to use. I'm going to come back to my beginnings. Can you see that my security right now still thinks I have the 1D on? It's selected outlined and checked. I need to change it because what I really have on is my 1C. And it's starred, but it hasn't been selected yet. And so to tell my machine, no, I'm sewing with 1C, I want to select this. And now my change in my presser foot selection shows that I have the 1C foot selected. It gets kind of time consuming to go through all these and find them. And you have a little magic spot up here that's your 09 and a little search icon. And I can simply say, no, the foot I want to find is my open embroidery foot, and I want it to be my open embroidery foot D. So I'm going to change it to that foot, and it will change to that. Be sure you change your foot on your machine to that if you're going to do that. But this is just a quick way when you're picking up a presser foot and you know the number and you don't want to have to hunt for it, you can use the little number search on it. This little icon on these upper machines also gives you a selection of presser feet that it thinks would be best for the stitch that you have selected. So right now it's telling me if you're doing a straight stitch, you could use any of these presser foot, they'd be good ones. For those of you that are not sewing, go back to here. That are not sewing on the 880 or the 790 or the 770. I want just to get this back to, yeah, let me get, yeah, I should just clear it, right? And I want to go back to my 1C foot, which is what I have on there. For those of you that don't have these upper level machines, how do I clear this? There. When you put a new presser foot on your machine, you're going to get a selection of presser feet on your screen, and some of them are going to be starred. And so when you look at the presser foot that you have on your 480 or your 435 or your 5 series machines, you're going to see stars in different places on these presser feet illustrations. And if the presser foot that you put on your machine is one of the starred, then you know you have an appropriate presser foot and you're going to be protected for that presser foot. You don't have to select the specific presser foot. Is that clear?
Yeah.
Okay. So setting up security. For those of you, well, all of you have the dual feed on it. If you're looking for more information on the dual feed in your workbook, if you will turn to page 27, it talks about the dual feed. And then Madeline, it also talks about the fine tuning adjustment for the 880 plus only. So yours is only the machine where you can change the amount of pressure that the dual feed is putting on you. So page 27 really does walk you through, showing you, it shows you the dual feed in a side illustration, how to attach it, and it talks about the purpose of it as a walking foot, and then tells you about the 880. And again, I'll give these pattern page numbers again to you in your kit for next week.
Thank you.
Also, in the back of your workbook, the very, very back of your workbook, on page 55, there's just a reference that really goes through again, talking about the difference of the Bernina presser foot and understanding the numbers and the letters. Talks about the number only feet, which were the classics for the 5.5. Talks about the letter C that are coded, and talks about the letter D that are now for dual feed. So that information, page 52 in your workbook. The next thing on our setup on page 5 it talks about the feed and how you know whether the feed are in an up position for sewing or in a down position for free motion sewing or embroidery. And you just see the little icon change on it. And any change you make on anything shows up in yellow to remind you that you've made changes on your machine. For your sewing, you're going to be using your presser feet in the up position for everything until you get to like a free motion sewing, or you start using your Bernina stitch regulator, and we'll do that when we get to the Bernina stitch regulator. Okay. Next thing I want to talk to you about a minute are needles. And so on page 5, it's going to talk about needle selection. And you don't have to remember all this because your machine is going to be telling you about some of that as well. And so if on your setup, if you will select the needle, and for those of you in the 4s and 5s, your needle is together with the presser foot here on the side. On the 7 series and the 8, the 2 are separated. And so I need to just touch the needle for this machine that I'm sewing on. First thing it's going to show you is the type of needle that you have in the machine. And this very first one that has been confirmed and selected means you just have a one-piece straight needle. Could be an embroidery needle, could be a quilting needle, could be a universal needle, it could be a sharp needle, it could be all of the single needles. The next set of needles that it's showing you are double needles. And what it's showing you on this is the size of the distance between the 2 double needles. And we're going to be putting a double needle in your kit for you to do some stitches on our little sampler with a double needle. And you're going to need to look at the size of the double needle that we give you, and you're going to need to select that double needle when you're ready to do that sewing. If you notice, then changes the needle configuration here on the sides to show you now you have a double needle in place instead of a single needle. This is what I think is really the most helpful to me about the needle information. This is your needle reminder. Let me go back to that just a second. It's this little needle over here with a string tied around it to help us remember what the needles look like and what they do and what size they are. So if you look at this, it tells you what the needle name is, what the point is, and then it gives you an illustration so that you can see, okay, that needle is slightly rounded, something that you can't see on a real needle. And they just don't look any different when you look at the point on this little tiny needle. But here, they're really showing you an eye size for thread, the type of needle. So you have universal needles, you have stretch needles with a medium ball point for sewing knits. You have a leather needle if you're doing leather that has a cutting point on it. It's a very flat and very sharp point on it. You have a jeans needle if you're sewing in really heavy jean fabric, and it has a very sharp point and a teeny bit bigger eye of that needle. And then you have a microtex needle, which has a very slim, accurate point too. And then you have more choices. You also have a sharp microtex with this really sharp, sharp point. And I'm finding a lot of times, even though I'm sewing on cotton and not microtex, which was a polyester, sometimes just having that sharp point on there doesn't leave as big a hole in the fabric that I'm sewing on if it's a little bit lighter weight. And so a sharp needle is something I choose once in a while. Kind of a go-to needle anytime I'm doing piecing and quilting, or your quilting needle. But again, if you'll look at the sharpness of the point on the quilting needle for penetrating through layers of fabric and batting. The embroidery needle also has a sharper point, but it's been rounded, because when you're doing decorative stitches and you're laying in a lot of thread in a design, you don't want this quilting needle to break that thread in your design. And so it's like it's like a ballpoint needle, not quite as rounded as that. I use both. I use this when I'm quilting. I use this for decorative stitching. The next one is a metafill if you're using metallic fabrics. And as you know, they fray real easily. And so your metallic needles have a bigger eye for your thread to be able to ride in longer, so that you really don't have the problem with thread fraying in your needle. And notice it also has a rounded point, so it won't cut the metallic thread in your design. The top stitch needle is the one that I use a lot for quilting if I'm doing quilt sandwiches. It has a very long eye, so it lets me use a bigger thread. And so if I'm using King Tut for quilting, this gives me room for that thicker thread to not be fraying as I stitch with it. And then you also have a felting needle, you have a jersey embroidery needle, and then you have a fine thread needle on it. For any of these needles that you choose, you can also choose the size that is best for the thread combination that you're doing. We say the 80-12 is kind of the standard 50 weight cotton thread. The 90 is like the King Tut with the 40 weight thread. If I'm doing monofilament, I'm going to be using a 70 or even a 60, depending on what it is, and the correct needle. So what they really want you to do, or the really first purpose of this, was for you to tell yourself what needle you put in the machine. And right now I have a universal 80 in my machine. And for most of, for a lot of sewing, that's just where I leave my machine set. But when I change it, I change this reminder so that when I come back to it, I'll know what needle was there and I can then make an appropriate change. In your workbook, again in the back, there is a reference page about needles on page 53, and there is the information sheet about all the things we just talked about on the screen. But to me, it's a lot easier to go through it on the screen than to have to look it up in the book. But this has some needles that we don't have on the screen. And so it's a good one to check back on occasionally. Plus, you also have this same information in your manual. So lots of places to get help for information. Close out of that. Okay. Going to talk about needles for just a minute. We all get collections of needles going, I think. And this is my kind of go-to collection that I'll share with you. These are just the ones that I really like and that I really use, if I can get them to be still a minute. I always keep universal needles so that I have a package of universal needles ready to use. I always keep quilting needles, and I also keep embroidery needles. The reason I have the titanium needles for quilting is that they're stronger than a regular needle and they last longer and they don't get dull as quickly. So that's kind of just a choice that I make. I also keep the top stitch needles in the size 90 for quilting. And a sharp is a needle that I go to in place of a universal needle. But if you'll look at my sizes stay pretty consistent with 80, 12s, and 90s. And when you get a collection of needles, the next question is, how do you find the next set of needles that you want? And those of you that have been in a mastery class with me before has seen this, but one of my students in a mastery class years ago came up with this little idea, and it really works for me. It's a baseball card. What do you call these?
Older.
Yeah, a baseball card sleeve. And then I put a little Velcro dot in them to keep the needles in. And then I just can kind of keep a collection of needles with me. And I travel running up and down, back and forth to the mountains. And what I really like about this, it can just go in my suitcase and it doesn't matter which way I turn it. They don't fall out. And I can see what I've got, what I'm missing, and if I've got the needle that I want for the next project. So baseball cards at for kids at Walmart or Staples, we have them. And it works really great for keeping your needles in place. The last thing I want to talk about is thread. And on thread, I'd like you to turn to your reference pages again, page 55. Thread, I think, is one of the confusing things maybe about making choices about, what color am I going to use on this project, and what kind of thread do I want to use with this project, and what fabric am I sewing on. And thread comes in different fibers. And this little page, Marco's doing a great job of keeping up with me and keeping. Okay. Probably the most available fiber that we have for thread is cotton, and its partner, I guess, is polyester. And we used to really say, if you're sewing on cotton fabric, you should sew with cotton thread. If you're sewing on a combination of poly and cotton, then you should sew with polyester. And we've gotten over that over the years. And we say, either thread is going to work just as well as the other one. And so whether it's cotton or whether it's polyester, if you're piecing, if you're quilting, it all works really well. Polyester is going to give you more luster. Cotton is going to give you a softer look. And that's really the basic difference between them. The weight of the thread is the strength of the thread. And for cotton thread, most of the time, you're looking at a 50 weight. For polyester, it's an extruded thread. And so what they extruded is what you get, and it says 100% polyester. It's comparable to the 50 weight cotton. The other two threads that are out there that are some things that can be chosen. Australia right now is doing a lot with rayon thread, and rayon thread is it's also a natural thread. It's made from wood fibers, and it's a very lustrous. It's even more lustrous than polyester. It's a really beautiful thread. For a long time, it wasn't as strong, but I'm seeing a lot of improvement in rayon threads on the market now. Silk thread has been around forever. It's one of the strongest threads, and it's one of the most beautiful threads. It's also one of the most expensive threads. So it's kind of, if I'm sewing on silk, I look for silk thread. I don't sew on silk very much anymore. It's hard to find. Yeah. So for thread, this is what I like. And so I'll share with you what I like. Some of you may have other things that you've worked with and that you like better or that you like as well, but this is kind of what I want to show you of what I like. This cotton thread, this is Mettler 3-ply. Number 50 means 50 weight. It's a 3-ply thread, sews beautifully in an 80-12 needle, has a really soft things. We keep all colors in it. Some of them are with a label. This particular one is a silk finished cotton, which means it really has luster to it and it's really a pretty thread. It can be just 100% cotton. It's any of our Mettler thread. This is kind of my go-to for almost any kind of piecing. This is also a Mettler thread, and this one is 100% polyester. When you look at the two together, they look just alike to me. Okay, the polyester thread is almost the same size, you know, uses the same size needle. And I have to tell you that when I'm looking for thread, color is probably the very first thing that I'm looking for. But I also want a high quality, low length thread. And that's why I select the European threads. The next thread this one's getting more popular with us, and it's more popular with me too. This is the Aurifil thread. And let me see if I can. This is Aurifil. It's made in Italy. It's a 100% cotton. It's 50 weight, but it's 2-ply, which means only 2 yarns were spun together instead of the 3 yarns that were spun together on the Mettler. So it's a 2-ply cotton. It's a sister to this guy, but it's a little bit finer thread. I'm liking it for quilting, and I'm liking straight line quilting especially. I'm liking it for piecing, and I'm liking it for bobbin thread, some in a neutral color. This next thread is our decorative Isacord. It's basically, we say it's an embroidery thread, but when you're doing decorative stitches, you're doing embroidery type of stitching. And so it is 100% polyester. It is a 40 weight. That's what Isacord 40 means. It's lustrous. It's beautiful. I just love doing decorative stitches with it. The next thread that we carry that I'm really fond of is the King Tut. And it's also a 40 weight. So it's the same as the Isacord in weight. It's also 100% cotton. It's sold through Superior Threads, which is a company in Utah made in Japan. What I love about it is the variegated thread colors that they do. It's just fun for quilting. It's fun for decorative stitches because of the variegated colors that you get. The last one is a bobbin thread. And this one is, again, a Superior thread. And it's called Bottom Line for a purpose. It's a 60 weight, which means it's a thinner thread than any of the 50 or 40 weight threads. And it's a good thread for your bobbin because it's lighter weight, thinner, doesn't build up as much in the underneath of your decorative stitches. And so I use it as bottom line for my decorative stitches as well as for some quilting. Those are my favorites. You probably have some too. When I was talking to them at Bernina, they were saying, you know, your machine also has some likes and dislikes about threads, and you may pick up a thread that you think looks wonderful, and your machine may be a little bit unhappy with it. And it's something to keep in mind. And one of the things that I know is that my Bernina is happy with all of these threads that I've suggested to you today. Questions? We're going to take about a 10-minute break, if that's okay with everyone, and we'll come back at about 10 after 11 and be threading our machines and bobbin. So when you come back, if you'd have your machine ready to thread and ready to wind a bobbin, we're going to do that, and then we'll do setups the last part of the class. So take a break.
Yeah, I'm learning, but I always match my needle to my type of fabric I'm sewing, not by the type of thread I'm using.
muted.
And okay. We're back on page 5 in the manual, and we're going to do threading both of our thread, our needle, and our bobbin. And I want to do the bobbin first. So I'm gonna. Just a reminder for taking your bobbin out. It's behind your bobbin case, of course. And you have the little pin, the little wire pin and a little bump on the end of the pin that is your release for your bobbin to come loose from the bobbin winder. And I want to show you how to walk your bobbin out of your bobbin case. This is a trick that Izzy was showing me, and it really does mean that you're protecting your bobbin case a little bit as you do this. Turn your bobbin over and lay it in your hand, and push that little release button just like you did to get it out of the machine, and that releases and loosens your bobbin. And when you pull it out, you bring your thread under the little hook in the front, bring it up, bring it out from under the little,
Spring.
what do you call it? Spring, and then away from the thread guide on the top of it. When you put it in, it will only go in correctly on these bobbins, which is really nice. Again, your thread goes under the little hook, lays flat under the spring, and comes around the thread guide in the top. And when it's ready to put into the machine, put it in with that looking in. And don't push on the little button, but push in the middle. Just push in the middle to secure it till you hear it click. And then there's a cutter right here on the side. Just bring your thread over, cut your thread, and close your bobbin case. And your machine, the bobbin is ready to go. I'm going to pull mine out again. And I'd like us to wind an empty bobbin. And again, I'm going to drop it out, walk it out. It really comes out so easy that way. You really will get used to doing it. And it really protects this little spring on the back of your bobbin. If you just yank it, it's a good way to stretch out that spring. All of you are using the new jumbo bobbin in all of your machines. For the two of you that have the special edition 790 that also has the 480, both machines are comparable. You can use you can use the same bobbin on either machine, the same presser feet and the same stitch plates in those two machines. To wind a bobbin, well, somewhere I have some bobbins, but I don't know where. Where are they? Ah, thank you. I very carefully put them up here so I'd know where they were. Okay. This is the bobbin winder on your machine and the connection for the bobbin winder on this machine. And Madeline, as you know, yours is totally different. So I'm going to do it for the majority of machines, and then we'll talk a minute about the 880 bobbin wind as well. But on the bottom of your machine, of your bobbin, you have little silver little pieces of silver markings. And these silver markings are what you want to protect on your bobbin, because the silver markings are what the machine is reading as you're using a bobbin to tell you when it's threaded correctly and when it's winding, running out of thread and doesn't have any thread. And so if you try and put it on the bobbin winder the other way, it won't go. It can only go with the silver markings down so it fits securely down on the bobbin pin. You're going to load your thread for the bobbin, and I'm going to fill my bobbin this morning with a Mettler 50 weight thread. I'm going to do two things on my spool pin. I'm always going to use a felt pad. Doesn't matter what kind of thread I'm using, I'm always going to use a spool pin. On those of you that have on the 4s, 5s, and 7 series, you always have the horizontal spool pin in the back, and you have a vertical spool pin on the side. And on the 480, you have a vertical spool pin that pops in and out of the top of your machine. So it's hidden and then comes up for you to use as a vertical pin. If I'm threading a bobbin with bottom line, which is a difference in the way it's wound on the spool, European thread is cross wound, and can you see the little X's in the cross wound? So you can tell that your thread has been pulled around your thread in patterns. If you look at the bottom line, you can see that your thread has been wound on the spool, stacked on the spool in a straight line. On these machines, if you're using bottom line for your bobbin, you would put that on the vertical spool pin. On this one, since I'm using the Mettler, I'm going to put it on my horizontal spool pin. And you want to match the size of your spool cap to the size of the spool that you're using. Like I say, I did this training with Bernina this last time, and we were using this same type thread. And I've always looked in the manual, and when I look in the manual, I see them put the spool pin on with the flat side against the front and the curve coming out, and that lets your thread float out over that and not catch on it. When we were doing it with the Bernina Ambassador, she was turning it so that the inside cap goes over, and again, it still protects your thread pulling off the screen. So my new take is it doesn't matter which way you put it on whichever way you're comfortable with and whichever way works best for you and your thread. I still find myself doing this, so I'm going to do this. I like it that way.
I like it too.
You're going to begin your threading just as if you were threading for sewing. And so you bring your thread to the back thread guide. And then following the arrows on the top, you're going to come to this little tension dial here in the front and bring your thread around that. And I'm going to hang on to this thread here in the back as I do that. It gives me better tension and it keeps my thread snug, both inside the thread guide and as it comes around the spool. And we learned this, Madeline, from threading the 880, that really does need you to hold on to that thread as you start the threading. And then you're going to just come to your bobbin, wind 2 or 3 windings around it, and then the little connection for your bobbin also has a thread cutter, so I can cut my tail and start winding my bobbin. You can stop it at any time that you want to when you have a certain amount of thread on there, and you can let it run until it fills the bobbin, and then it will automatically disengage the little lever that winds it. I'm just going to wind it partially because we're not going to be doing that much sewing here in class, and so I don't need a full bobbin. On the 880, Madeline, you have that opportunity to tell it how much thread. You can have 25%, 50, or 100%, which is really nice. The rest of us just kind of need to gauge how much thread you're going to be using. If you fill it full, you're going to have thread for probably a whole project. When you're done, take it off and cut the thread with your little thread cutter. And then you're ready to take your bobbin case. And again, the silver markings go inside the bobbin case. And then your thread is going to pull counterclockwise, and mine's not in there. There it is. Be sure your bobbin's in the case. Comes under that little point, lays under the spring tension, and comes from the back to the front through the thread guide. Let me get my hand out of the way. I can do this with my hand. Where am I? Silver in, your thread is coming counterclockwise under the hook, lays under the tension spring, comes underneath the thread guides, get over here, and comes around and snaps up into the crook at the top of the thread guide. And then is simply the little lever that releases goes horizontal into the case and push in the center so it's secured. Cut your thread and close your bobbin case. But here's a trick, or it's not a trick, here's a reminder. If you forget to close your bobbin case, and your machine will start sewing, and all of a sudden you will get a message up here that's little gears with an X in it, and it says, I'm not sewing anymore. And you've done something wrong. And all you've done is forget to close your bobbin case. And all you have to do to fix it is reach underneath and close your bobbin case, and then your machine will begin sewing again. Okay? Well, that's winding your bobbin and inserting your bobbin into your machine. After you've done that, it's time to thread your machine. So we're going to thread it with the same fabric, same thread, not fabric. Going to thread it with the same thread that we have in the machine. And so again, I'm going to hold with my right hand my thread as it comes from the spool of thread. I'm going to drop it under the thread guide. I'm going to pull it through the tension discs, which are these little tiny lever that you see on the top, comes down the face of the machine under and around the take-up lever, pulls into the take-up lever, comes down the guide. There's a thread guide right here on top. You want to go behind this thread guide. And on the 5s and 7 series, there is also a needle guide, a thread guide right here at the top of your needle. And has a little pin and then a little flat opening right here. And Marco's got a really good shot of that on the screen. From this top thread guide, you want to go behind that little bar, and you want your thread to rest into that little groove right there on front. He's got a great shot so that you can see how that fits. What that does is keep your thread coming right down the face of your needle so that it, as it goes into the needle threader, it's really held right in place so that your needle has control of your thread. You're going to use your semi-automatic threader, your needle threader, and I bring mine partway down with, just bring it down till I can see this little white finger. I wrap it around the post, back to front. I drop it and I let this little square on the side just surround my needle. So it's totally surrounded by the needle. I pull it to the back. And if you have, sorry, I'm in the way. If you have the 480 or the 500 series, you have a thread cutter right, get my hand out, right here on the side of the inside. And so as your thread has come into there, you come up and cut it. I don't have that on the 790 machine. So I don't hang on to this tight. Can you see there's some give in that thread? And as I let my guide, I can see the hook has gotten hold of my thread and is pulling my thread through to the back. And then 100 yards of thread's going to come through there and I'm going to cut it. Are you all comfortable with the thread guide, with using it? Anybody having issues with it?
I have a
Anybody got your
question.
needle threaded?
I have a question, Ann.
Madeline, as you know, the 880, both the bobbin winding and the threading is completely different. Do you have an issue? I don't have a machine to show you that here in front of me, but you do have on your screen you have the tutorial for it. Are any issues that you're having with threading bobbin or needle?
No, I'm very
No?
au fait with
Wonderful.
threading
Perfect.
and bobbin.
Perfect, because I do know that's different.
Well, I have just
Okay,
one
wait
question.
just a second. I need to get you so I can hear you.
Can you hear me
Okay.
now?
Yes.
Okay, one question I have is the difference between the threads,
Coming.
The way they're wound on the spool.
yeah. Exactly.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
still, I just put them on my, on my holder, on my thread holder and they're
Yes.
all vertical. So
That's perfect.
that's okay. Nothing else to do,
Yes.
correct?
There isn't, and the reason for that, the reason that either a cross wound or a stacked thread can sit upright on your machine is that you have the, what
The
do you call
take up
that?
thing.
The
yeah.
take up, yes, because your thread is going up to the take up and then feeding across your machine. So
Okay.
on your machine, it really isn't critical for either one. Okay,
Okay, thank you.
good. Okay. Anybody else a question about?
And I have a question. Ann, can you hear
Yes.
me?
Yes.
I used my raised hand because but can you even see it?
Oh, no, yeah.
Hang on just a second.
Yeah, I see it on your tablet.
Okay. Okay. Say again.
Oh, there you go.
Okay. I didn't have the video on, but now you can see me and you can see that I have a
Yes.
raised hand in the corner.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And the reason I'm asking that is because I was trying to get your attention before and I couldn't. And so I thought I would use the raised hand, but it doesn't do any good if you don't see it.
I couldn't see you. I'm sorry. I see you now. That's better. I could hear your
Okay.
voice, but I couldn't see you.
Well, even when you couldn't see me, you could still see the raised hand. It's up in the upper, anyway, my question was back about the bobbin. Because when I was
Yes.
winding the bobbin, my screen changed and I wanted to ask you about that. It just automatically went to a different screen and it had things I didn't understand.
It's probably talking about the speed.
Yeah, there's a speed on, let me
There was a number,
see if I
like
can
60.
share. Can you, we'll get my screen going in just a minute. And I'll
All right,
show you
so
what
there's the
what's
screen.
happening. When you are ready to wind your bobbin and you have your bobbin here and you connect the bobbin, one thing
That's
it's
what
going
I
to
got.
sing for you. And then this is the screen. And for all of your machine, what they're showing you is the speed at which your thread is winding. You can push it all the way up to 100% and it's going to wind in a big hurry. The default, which is the little circle in the center of this slide, is kind of the default, and I kind of leave mine there. It's not such a fast wind. I can also adjust it up or down if I have a special speed. I use this more if I'm winding a bobbin with a monofilament thread, or if I'm using a polyester thread, because there's a little bit more stretch in those two threads. And so that's a slowdown for me. Otherwise, I leave it kind of set at the default, which is about 60 on this machine. And the other thing, notice, when I change this, I get a yellow circle around it. When I say, no, I want to go back to my default, if I just touch it, it clears the change and takes it back to default. And you're going to find that happens with many of the things that we'll be doing, where we'll be changing. You can also confirm that you're done, and and it'll still wind your bobbin and finish winding your bobbin. And when you come into your sewing room some morning and you wiggled around or thrown some fabric over your machine or something, and your machine is humming at you, just remember it's your bobbin winder. And just all it needs is to be turned off. Okay. Any other concerns or question about threading?
I could not get it. I
Good.
can't get it. No, I can't. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, Elsie.
I was not able to do it, but I don't want to hold everybody up. I'll practice on it, but I don't understand. You go down, you go under that white part there on
Yeah.
the left.
Let me do it one more. Let me do it one more
Okay.
time for
And
you.
I'll just watch.
Okay.
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 Thank you.
And before I use the thread, let me pull this around. When you pull this down, you notice your presser foot gets down and out of your way. And
Right.
I have not yet engaged my needle. I won't engage my needle
Right.
until
Right.
this black part, or this silver part, comes around it. So I'm going to go under that little post, pull this down, push hard right now until this little silver, it's
Okay.
like a little square box, comes around the head of the needle. And then check and be sure that your thread is in the slit on the side of it and not under it. And then don't hang on tight, because the little hook that goes through your needle needs to be released slowly so that it will pull that thread up to the back.
Okay.
You see
Try one
that?
more time.
And it's just practice.
Right.
There are some mornings when I get into sew and it takes me 2 or 3 times to get this going, and the rest of the time I get it the first time. So
Yeah, I
So
don't want to hold everybody up. I just,
One of the things I
But-
found that has helped me when I have trouble with it is if I do the needle down, then the needle up, it puts it just in the right position and it'll work afterwards. Sometimes I just cannot get it to
Okay.
thread the needle unless I do that.
okay, if you've been we're going to get closer with the camera so you can see what's happening on the side over there. Okay, I'm in my needle in my thread guide here at the top.
Right,
I'm coming around the post.
right.
I'm bringing it over. Can you see that little square come? And then I'm going into the groove on the side.
Okay, I think that's where I'm losing it,
Can you
that last
see?
part.
Yeah, if it's
Oh,
not in
okay.
that little groove
Okay.
on the side, the hook is not going to
Oh,
catch your
okay.
thread.
Okay.
And then
let
when
me
you
see.
turn it loose, if the hook's got it, you don't have to don't hold on to your thread as your hook pulls it through. And then push it through from the right to the left and it unthreads. Okay, is that better?
Uh,
That better?
I,
It's just practice. It really
Yes.
is, you know.
yeah,
3
I'll
times
work on it.
and then you can thread the needle. You can put the thread through the needle eye. You know, we all know how to do that.
Yeah,
But I really encourage you to just do it 2 or 3 times. Don't be frustrated by it because
right.
it's really
Yeah, I'm
important.
determined
Once
to
you get
learn
the
it.
hang of it. Yeah. And
Yeah.
the 480 is exactly the same. It still has the, and it, oh, good. Here, look on this one. On this one, as Marco's got you can see the slot right here. Can you see my
Right.
nails going up there? You can see the slot where that thread has to be.
And
in
you
Okay.
order.
might be able to see the hook
Yeah, and you can,
actually go through the
yeah,
eye of the
and you can actually
eye.
see the hook penetrate the eye, I think, on
Okay,
camera.
that may be,
Okay, I'm gonna pull it out. Can you see it pull out to the back?
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I understand how to do it. I'm just
It's
not able to
this
make it
little
work,
teeny
but
finger
I'll
that's
practice.
in there. And you can actually hear, on this machine, I can actually hear the hook pushing through
Yeah,
and then
okay.
pulling out. And
right.
this machine is the one that has you actually, I should thread this machine for you maybe. Let me do this machine because those of you that have the 500, oh wait, and good. There's one more thing I want to show you. When you're putting your thread on your machine, and Madeline, this would apply for you as well, even though you're setting it up differently. When you finish with your thread, you have this little groove on the side of it where you
Yeah.
can wind your thread so it won't ravel out all over everything. And when you start to thread it, you want to be sure you've released all of that thread. And my rule of thumb is this part of my spool pin that has the catcher always goes to the felt pad.
Okay.
It never comes to the front of when I have my spool on. And well, I don't have to do that.
Huh. You had mine
And then
wrong.
this machine threads exactly the same way through your thread guide. And again, I'm holding my thread at the back through the take-up lever, thread guide in front. The thread guide on the needle is on the side and to the front, but it positions the thread right down the face of the needle. And if you've been sewing or something, your needle might not be in the full upright position. I'm using my hand wheel to move the needle, and I want to turn it so that my needle is in the highest position. With my hand wheel, turn it. See, I'm wiggling my needle. I'm going to turn it so my needle is in the highest position for threading. On this one, I'm going to come around. Come around my little post. Oh, I forgot. And this one, your presser foot lifter is the old-fashioned way with a presser foot lifter in the back. When I get my needle to this point, I'm going to lower my presser foot. I'm not going to lower it while I'm putting my thread through the tension disc or the take-up lever. But when I'm into my groove and I'm ready, then I'm going to pull that around.
There you go.
You do it again. Oops, it's going to thread it. Come here. Okay, going to catch my post, pull my little box around my needle, insert my thread into that side groove, come up here, cut my thread, and pull the thread through the needle. And then raise my presser foot with the lever in the back. This is just the 480, the 4 series, the 435, the 480 that does that. But some of your 570s, Mary, and who else is on 570s, may also
Yes.
have this cutter for your needle thread. And then you're never in danger of pulling the thread out by hanging on to it too tightly. So, okay.
And would you, and
Yes.
I have to interrupt again, would you show me again how the bobbin goes, the bobbin case goes back in the front of the machine?
Yeah.
For the bobbin case.
Yeah, when the
Goes
bobbin's
back
been
into the
put in the
machine.
case. Yeah, how,
Uh-huh.
I know how to release it. You push it in and it pops out.
Okay, you've got to be sure this little, at the end of this little, let me turn it. Can you see at the end of this little wire, there's a little bubble. It goes out and makes a little
Yes.
bubble. Okay, that's
Uh-huh.
your release. Okay, when I'm going to put it back into, whoops. When I'm going to put it back into, I'm going to set it in flat so that that wire is horizontal, and I'm going to push it in the middle behind where that little hook is.
If you're still holding that spring while you try to push it in.
Yes,
keep
I'm
pushing
still.
out.
Yeah, if you keep holding this, as soon as you turn loose, it's coming out. So you want to push it in the middle, and you need to hear that little click as your bobbin case sets in place. That help?
Thank you. That was really good because the position of your finger on there is really important.
Yeah, it's really important that when you're pushing it in, your finger is behind this little hook, a little hump. So it's here. Could say on the left-hand side of the bobbin, I guess, too. So, and you don't need to bring your bobbin thread up to start sewing. There's enough thread from that cut so that your bobbin is now ready to sew. Okay? The other thing on all of your machines, right here in the front, there's a little bobbin. And when you touch that little bobbin, they will give you a little video of how to thread your bobbin. And they will do it over and over and over. The other thing that, and then you can, once you've watched it and got the idea, the other thing is that you can hear when you're running out of bobbin thread, a little teeny tiny thermometer will start showing you that your bobbin thread is getting low. When your bobbin thread is empty, the machine will stop sewing. I want to show you a couple of other things about threading. Over here on the side, we're going to be talking about the setup menu. And this is the help menu on the side of your machine that's going to be giving you places and things to do to set up the machine for your sewing, but also to help you remembering things. And the one I want you to look at is the one that looks like a little open book. For those of you with the 5 and the 400 series, yours over here has a little house, a question, and a clear button. When you touch, oh, I've got the wrong kind of stylus for this machine. When you touch it, it opens a screen, and now those same help things are here across the bottom. And so you're going to touch the little tutorial. This is your tutorial. And when you touch the little tutorial, you've got all kinds of things on the screen that can help you remember how to do things. You have a threading guide. You have different techniques. You have your BSR, you have embroidery, you have embroidery techniques, things about presser foot, buttonholes, quilting suggestions, things about needles, miscellaneous things, your freehand system, and troubleshooting. I'm just going to touch threading because if you're having trouble with threading, this is a place that you can get a reminder of how to do things. It will give you directions for winding your bobbin on your machine. Threading the bobbin, inserting and removing the bobbin case, threading the upper thread, threading a double needle. We're going to do that later. Your automatic thread cutter, which we'll talk about, thread tension. And so one of the things that I think is really helpful about the machine is sometimes we just don't remember what we did yesterday, you know, and it's helpful to know that here you have that kind of information in your tutorial. And there's information about needles, anything that you need information about. Underneath it is a tutorial that lets you, gives you some information about how do I set up my machine when I'm going to be sewing on a lightweight woven, a middleweight woven, whoops, not that, come on. Up. Not you. Oh, come on. I'm gonna go away a minute and come back.
Sometimes I just turn my machine off if it's acting up silly. So I just turn it off and it comes back just fine.
What are you trying to get?
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is, I guess I'm gonna have to do that.
Yeah, that's computers for you.
It just, you know, it's just time it has to be there. Okay.
And can you use clear for that?
It's just going to the-
Yeah, yeah. Okay. This, yeah, this screen over here on the 480 is the same one. Let me try, I'll try again in a minute over here. Okay, creative consultant, there we go. Okay, I'm not gonna touch it this time because it's gonna, but what it is, it's different types of fabric. So like this is a lightweight woven, a medium woven, a heavyweight woven. This one is the jeans. Underneath, these are pile fabrics, like this is toweling. And this one is a pile like corduroy or velvet. This is a knit, like interlock. This one is a fur or a leather, I think. And this one is, I'm sorry, these are knits. This is a low knit, a high knit, a thick knit, and a fur. And then this one are your piles. This is your toweling. This is like corduroy. This would be like leather. And this would be like lace or a very batiste or something lightweight. So when you have a piece of fabric you haven't sewn on for a while, like when's the last time you sewed on velvet? And so you want to know some suggestions about how I sew on velvet. And it's telling you Well, you can sew a straight stitch on velvet. You can sew a zigzag stitch on velvet. You could do a blind hem on velvet. You could put a buttonhole in it or a zipper. You could do decorative stitches. You could embroider. And so I just want to know how to put a zipper in this velvet. And what the creative consultant does, it tells you a potential setup that you can use in your machine. It's saying, okay, you could use stitch number 1. You could use an 80 needle, straight needle. You could use a polyester, 100% polyester, 1 ply or 2 plies in this case. And you would need to use presser foot number 4, which is your zipper foot. And if you say, that sounds good to me, now I just want to get that zipper sewn. If I confirm this, it sets my machine up with my zipper foot, my straight stitch, tells me what foot I have put on it. It has reduced my presser foot pressure a little bit for the zipper tape, and I'm now ready to sew a zipper. It has even moved my needle to the side of the zipper tape. So it can give you a complete setup of how to sew on a fabric. And again, this is the creative consultant. We're here. Just a help that's on your screen for setups.
So Anne,
The question, yes.
how do you get out of that? I pressed 1 and now it won't go away. And I've pressed clear and it still won't go away. So how do I get away from out of that?
For this
Oh,
one, so you
yeah.
might just have to,
Just
I
come
get-
up
I
to the
get, Dan, I
creative
get the X.
consultant.
I'll
Okay,
show you.
yeah. From the one that's set, let me,
It's for both of them. You can use
okay,
top
this is
left.
where it was set.
Yeah,
Touch creative consultant again. Okay,
yeah.
touch and then
Just choose something.
hit your
X.
delete, your close X up in the corner.
So she
Okay,
was saying how
now-
to like change off of them. So like whenever you click that one, if you hit the
It
any one
won't
of
go
these, it'll
away.
open
Yes.
that. You just have to click up here on the
Yeah.
middle.
Okay, when you're moving in here to check, is that what you're asking?
Yeah, it
Like,
won't
I
go
can
away
say-
now.
Yeah.
can't go to a different.
Okay, so I have this on my screen and I'm done with that. I
Yeah,
might want to know about that one, and it will, if I confirm, it'll make a different one. But I could go back to my creative consultant. That takes me back to that screen
You have that little top left icon.
in the top left-hand corner up here, the little bread. This is called a breadcrumb. We'll talk about breadcrumbs more and more as we go. This is a little breadcrumb. Take me back to this first setup. I have that here. I'm done. I can close that. My machine is going to go back to where it was set up until I do something different, because it still thinks I have my zipper foot on here, and it still thinks I'm going to sew a zipper on. And now
Yeah.
I'm going to tell it, no, I'm done. I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to go back to my 1C foot. I'm going to take my presser foot pressure back to the default, which is 50. And now I have it set up again where I started.
So that makes sense, Battle?
Does that make sense?
ah,
Because I.
Yeah.
no, I just
that
want
she
it.
couldn't get to after she clicked one of these,
Yeah.
that she couldn't get back to the screen.
Okay.
So she just has to
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah. If you're coming back to this screen to change fabric,
Yeah,
if I said I'm in velvet down here,
yeah,
then if you look here at the breadcrumbs up at the top,
yeah,
it's saying what you've selected right now is breadcrumbs.
right.
If you want to change that, go back to the creative consultant, and this time you can choose woven, And now I have woven in my breadcrumb, and I can go back to creative consultant for something different. Maybe if I want to look at fur or leather this time. And now I don't have as many choices for leather, but it tells me I have leather on the screen, and I want to go back to the beginning. And when I'm done with this, I'm going to close it with the X, and that takes me back to my screen. And I've changed it back for my 0, but can you see that my needle is, whoops, I cleared it, I'm sorry, that my needle was set for a needle position. And don't forget, your needle position can be set manually, or it can be set by the creative consultant. So, so that's creative consultant. This right here is, what if you just want some information about one thing and you don't want to hunt through all of that other? I can push my question mark and I can say, what is that? And it will tell me, this is my information icon. It displays the possible function that I can do. Thank you. I just needed to know that for a minute. Or I'm going to touch my question and it's going to tell me, I don't know what you want. I'm sorry. It does that to me occasionally, you know, and I can say, okay, never mind. I can say, what is that right there? And it will tell me. This is my single and combi mode. So those 3 things in all of your machine are just meant, I think, reminder helpers of how to do things and what kinds of features your machine will do. Now I want to talk to you about setting up the sewing features of your machine. And what I've touched is, it looks like little gears here underneath your house or across the bottom right next to your house if you're it's right here on this machine. And as you get higher up in the number of machines, as you get to the 8 series, you're going to see more of the setup features available. But if in your manual now, if you'll turn to page 6, page 6 is going to help us work through personalizing your screen so that your machine is now going to be set up for how you want to sew. When I first got this machine, I had this feeling, well, I just set my machine up this way and that's the way it's always going to sew. And that's really not true. What you really want to do with setup is you'll go back to it when you're doing a new kind of project or when you want to do something differently, and you'll set it up for that different kind of sewing. So the very first thing that it talks about on page 6 is personalizing your screen. And so when you look at your screen, if you've got a little human figure of sorts right here, a little cartoon, touch him or her, and then you get the personalizing screen on your screen. When you turn your machine on, it says, welcome, Bernina, made to create, okay? If you want it to say something else, you can touch that welcome. It gives you a keyboard with uppercase, lowercase, letters, figures, and you can simply type in here whatever you want it to sew, and you can delete welcome out, or you can put welcome back in all caps. And it will always say welcome. Personally, what I put on that screen is the month and the year I bought the machine, because that helps remind me that it needs to come see Marco for a week and get, you know, all cleaned up and put back in good shape ready to sew again. And so that's just a personal way for me to remember to bring the machine in for an annual day at the spa, as we say, with Marco. When you put something new in, you do need to confirm it, and then that's what it will show. And I don't want to change it on this demo machine, but the other thing you can do is you can change the color of the screen to any of these colors. So you can put your favorite color in, or you can do a season color in, whatever you like, and then it changes the color on the screen. I'll leave it. This is the default, is the blue. On this side, you may have on this side, you have 6 choices of textures that you could put on the machine. And on the smaller machines, you may only have 3. I choose the mountains just because I love the mountains in New Mexico. And so I kind of like that little shadow behind my screen. I'll leave it set as the demo. This is just your play place. But remember those breadcrumbs. Up here, this tells me where I was in the welcome and I want to go back to my setups. So I'm going to touch my gears again. We're not going to do anything with embroidery, but when you're doing the embroidery class with Sharon, you'll do the setups for your embroidery machine. But we're going to do some setups for the sewing features. And so we're going to do let me go back to there just a second. And on this screen, we have some things that we really do want to do for your setup. And they're pretty much the same. If you look on page 5, the second thing it talks about is activate or deactivate a beginning tie off, which is like a beginning security. And so that's this middle. It's a needle going into a knot. And what it's saying is, when you start sewing, do you want me to put a knot in your fabric to secure your stitches before they start? If you do, it needs to be the little 1. If you don't, it needs to be 0. And let me tell you how I feel about that. It doesn't work for me, okay? Because you've got to have your fabric in exactly the right position on your stitch plate in order for your needle to come down into your fabric. And your needle has to be going into fabric to make the knot. It will not make a knot when you get to the end of the seam. It's only a beginning security stitch. And we're going to learn there are a lot of other places on these machines that have security stitches that you can secure the beginning of your stitch and then the end of your stitch. Okay, so my suggestion to you is turn this off. If you want to leave it on and try it and see how it works for you, please do. That's really what setup is all about. It's finding what works for you and what doesn't. And I'm leaving it on this machine because it's a demo machine. And so we've got it turned on as a demo machine. This top feature is needle tension. And one of the beauties of the Bernina machine is how simple it is to make tension adjustments. If you look at this adjustment, it says the tension for this whole machine is 0.0. So when your needle thread comes down, and that's the white, when your bobbin thread comes up, and that's the blue, and they lock a stitch together, it's going to be a perfect stitch. And every stitch in this machine has been set at the factory for a default tension. have, if you change this, it changes for the whole machine. And you don't want to do that.
Yeah. it
You
should
know,
just
you just
be-
do not want to do that.
Yeah, it should just be the top tension.
Yeah, it's just your top tension that you really want to change. And we'll look at another way to do that. So with this one, I keep this turned off. Actually, I don't turn it off. I leave it at the default setting so that it's a 0.0, so that I know that the tensions for all the other stitches in my machine are going to be at the factory setting for me. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes, it does.
So
But
these
as a
two
matter,
are my kind of, I don't do anything with them.
as a
I'm
matter of
sorry,
in-
Madeline, I don't hear you.
is that the same for the embroidery? Is it 0, 0 for embroidery also?
It's a different setup in embroidery. This is just sewing. So
Okay.
for embroidery, yes, you might want to be using that, but not for sewing, it's different.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. And when you do, you know,
And
when
I
you're doing
have-
setups for embroidery, you're going to go into that hoop instead of into the machine. I
Right.
do
And
want you
I-
to look at, yes. Yes,
I have a
Mary?
question about one back about the knot. When you have it set on the knot, does it take away the need for you to hold both threads so that they don't get pulled into the machine when you start sewing?
No, no. It makes a knot and it will pull the top thread through to the back in a little bird's nest if you don't hang on to that thread. Does that,
Okay,
you know,
yes, that
there's such
answered my
strong
question.
needle penetration. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, you just want to be in control of that thread even though it's making a knot. Probably more so when it's making a knot so that you get a neat knot. That's a good way to say it, right? Okay, okay. That answer your question? Okay, I want you to look over here. This is little fingers and these are buttons that you set on your machine. So these are some things that will be something that you're probably going to want to do. One of the features of the new Bernina is the hover feature of your machine. And the hover feature is when you stop sewing and your needle is in the fabric, or even when you're positioning your fabric under the needle. Can you see it come back up? You do it again. Raise my presser foot, put my fabric under here, ready to sew, lower my presser foot. My presser foot goes down and comes up slightly. I can do anything to this fabric now I need to do. I can get it back so I really do have a 1/4 inch seam on here or a 5/8 inch seam on here, or I can get it so that I'm now over in this position and my machine is now ready. It will, when I step on the foot feed, it will now start sewing. But that hover gives you just a minute to adjust your fabric and be sure your fabric is exactly where you want it. The default for that hover is 2.0 millimeters. So it's just tiny and just gives you enough room so that you can really realign your fabric. If you need more, you can increase that amount up to 7 millimeters. If you need less, you can take it down to 1. And I just leave it set at 2 so that I just have that little lift when I need it. Go back 1. That's your presser foot hover. Back in my fingers. The next one is your automatic thread cutter. And it looks like this little pair of scissors. And it's the second button up here on the bottom. When you press this button, it will cut both your needle thread and your bobbin thread. However, you can also activate a securing stitch for that. So you could activate either a knot so that it will just sew a little 4 stitches in place to make a knot and then cut your thread, or you can make it
So that's choosing.
so that it sews 4 little teeny tiny stitches and then cut your thread. I use this set with little tiny stitches when I'm doing piecing of like half square triangles and I have a big square and I want it to be secure at the beginning of the 2 pieces and at the end of the 2 pieces. I rarely use a knot, but I could. I just like the little teeny stitches because then when I go to put a quilt block together, my 1/4 inch seams don't fall apart. Does you follow that? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So this one I set for little tiny stitches. And the default for little tiny stitches, it's 4 little stitches. You can take it, you can make more if you want, but I find 4 stitches is almost exactly a 1/4 inch. And so it really stays in my 1/4 inch seam allowance and at the end of it. So this to me, if I'm piecing, I do this. If I'm doing other kind of sewing, I don't do either one of these. And we'll find out why in a minute, but okay, so that's my thread cutter. This up here is your pattern end feature. And on the face of your machine, you have a pattern end button. It's a half triangle followed by 3 little dots, 3 little stitches. If I touch it in my setup, I can do these things with it. I can make a knot, either a stitch in place, or again, I can choose how many. I can have it cut my thread. I can have it lift my presser foot. So I'm sewing decorative stitches. I get to the last decorative stitch I'm going to sew. I touch my button. It finishes that pattern. It cuts my thread and lifts my presser foot. The next one is, this goes back to your hover stitch. And the center of this is a place that you can program your, with your needle in the down position. And I want to go back and show you where that is. Right here on your screen is a little needle with a line. If you touch this, it will change the stopping position of your needle. If the needle's above the line, when you stop stitching, your needle comes up. If it's below the line, when you stop stitching, the needle stays in the fabric. Okay. I'm back in setups, back in sewing, back in fingers, back in my needle in the down position. I have to have set it on my screen in the down position for me now to adjust these things. If you've gotten kind of hooked on,
I have.
well, the word just went away. If you've gotten hooked on doing ruler work for quilting and you're using the ruler to guide your number 72 ruler foot, you do not want your presser foot to come up in a hover. You want your presser foot to stay down so that needle can't slide under it. So you'd open your security and you would select this where your needle does not come up when you stop stitching with your needle in the down position. If you're wanting it to come up when it's in the down position so you can turn your fabric somehow, then you would want it in the middle position. If you're doing that on a quilt sandwich and you want to change the direction of your stitching on a quilt sandwich, when your needle stops in the down position, you want it to come up even higher. And so those are your choices. I leave mine down a lot because I do a lot of wiggling around. But when I need it to hover, I'd be sure I go back to my setups and make this change. The last one is, here's another knot. This one is just a plain, ordinary knot you could put at the beginning of your stitching or the end of your stitching. And you can program it so it's the stitch in place or it's the little decorative stitches. And it happens when you touch the knot that's on the face of your machine. It will stitch either in place as you chose, or it will stitch the 3 little stitches. For some of you, it's a button here on the face of your machine. For others of you, it's down here on in either these stitches or on the 880 over here in these stitches. Okay.
Yes.
Going to go one more stitch, and this is your foot control, and your foot control can be programmed in 4 different ways. The foot control is a kickback. You can see his heel coming, or her heel coming down on the back of your presser foot, and all of them are programmed so that if you do that kickback, the automatic program will raise or lower your needle, whichever your needle is. If you want it to do any of these things, you choose my personal preference. And again, you can have it do a knot or securing stitches. When you kick back, it will raise the needle, cut the thread, raise the presser foot. That's how I keep mine set up. I set it up so that my needle comes up, it cuts the thread, it raises my presser foot. I change these things depending on what I'm sewing, and hope you will, experiment with this. I want to stop us right there because I think we've run over about 15 minutes. And I don't know whether you're still with me or not. Are they still with me?
Yeah.
Okay. What I want you to know is that I'm going to have your kits ready for you. And we're putting them together this afternoon. They'll be here at the store. And it's going to be the kit to make this little sampler piece. Whoops. How about this little sampler piece? But I need you to do something before next week, because next week we're going to be sewing on this one. When I did this at Bernina, when I was done, we used a piece of very kind of no color grosgrain ribbon on it. I went to the store and tried to find it, and I could not find a 1-inch wide grosgrain ribbon. So I went and thought, what can I find? And this is what I found, this little ribbon. And I
Nice.
thought, you know what? I'm going to take that one, and it's going to tell me what color threads would work in this little sampler. So your homework is to go someplace where they sell ribbon, find a ribbon that you really, really like, okay? Use it to select the colors of thread that you want to use. And you're going to want either 4 or 5 different colors. So be colorful, because your background fabric is going to be very plain, just like this is. So you want that to show. Okay. Next week, we're going to start
What
working
kind of
with our
length?
quilting stitches. I'm sorry.
What length do we need of that ribbon?
Be sure you get, if you get just a roll, they're about 5 yards. If you're buying by the yard, you get at least 3 yards of ribbon. And do get either a 1-inch or a 7/8 inch. Don't get narrower and don't get wider. And do get grosgrain. Don't get silk, because silk doesn't iron well and doesn't wear well. So you do want grosgrain ribbon. So this is from Hobby Lobby. You know, there are other places you can find ribbon. Hope you can find something that you don't have to do pink. You know, if you're not a pink person, don't do pink. Do something that's your color. Okay. But this is what we'll be working on for the next 3 weeks. Question?
Yes, this is Gina. Will
Hey,
you
Gina.
my kit, as I don't live in Las Cruces, I live in Santa Fe.
We will mail your kit to you. You're in Santa Fe and Madeline
Yes.
is in Silver City. We'll mail kits to you. They should go out tomorrow.
Nice,
So you'll
thank
have
you.
them for next Tuesday. Okay.
Okay, thank
And
you.
first thing we'll do on Tuesday is pull your kit apart and get started sewing on your kit. And so having picked out your thread color is what's really going to be important. And you know, if you do a decorative ribbon, that's fine. If you do a neutral ribbon, that's okay too. Just make sure that your thread is going to be colorful so that you can see the stitches, because our whole thing is to see the stitches. And I'm sorry I kept you over. Go to lunch and enjoy your afternoon.
How many
And thank
spools?
you so much for joining us. Yes, Pat.
How many spools of thread?
Do at least 4 different colors, 4 or 5. 4 or 5 colors. It's
Okay,
just more
thank
fun
you.
to play with multiple colors.
Anne, I
Yes.
got interrupted. What are we doing with the ribbon?
Pardon? One more.
How are we using the ribbon?
The ribbon is going to be used as your binding. When we finish, we're gonna sew 3 different panels of 3 different kinds of stitches, and then you're going to quilt this so that it's quilted, and then you're going to bind the edges with the ribbon instead of
Which
binding.
doesn't happen till the very end.
Which doesn't happen till the very end. But hopefully your ribbon will help you pick out the colors of thread that you're going to want to use on a neutral background. Okay? Thank you,
Okay.
ladies. So this will be pre-recorded. If there's anything in there that you have questions about, you can watch it again. And in your kit, you will have page numbers of the references for what we've gone through today, as well as for the rest of the class. Okay?
Thank you very much.
Okay. Well,
Thank
good
you.
week, everybody, and see you next
See you
week.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.